Tonight, RCMP in Alberta are defending an officer who punched a woman in the face during an arrest.
I hate to say this, but a lot of people abuse the system.
The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal raised concerns over what was happening with Jordan's principal days before the government made changes.
I think in recent years, a lot of Indigenous stories have been diluted.
And a new partnership has been created to train Indigenous filmmakers in Northern Ontario. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. A video posted on social media and then quickly deleted recently sparked outrage. It shows an Alberta RCMP officer in the Cold Lake area punching an Indigenous woman in the face while she is on the ground during an arrest. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
Somebody. Hey! Don't you touch me or you're getting arrested too.
Whoa! Whoa! On Sunday, January 5th at around 3:49 p.m., Cold Lake RCMP said they were attempting to arrest a woman after she went 79 kilometers over the speed limit. The woman in the video, who asked not to be identified, was on the ground when she lifted an arm towards the officer. He then responded by punching her in the nose. Due to the graphic nature of the video, APTN News is not showing you the video of her bloodied face. The RCMP K Division in Alberta responded to APTN's news in a statement, which read in part that the woman was stopped after she was speeding, going 179 kilometers an hour in a 100-kilometer speed zone. And once she was pulled over, the RCMP says she resisted arrest and grabbed the officer repeatedly and did not listen to lawful commands, resulting in the officer striking her. The woman now has 4 pending charges, including flight from police, assaulting and resisting a police officer, and failing a roadside impairment test. The woman in the video told APTN News that the officer used excessive force against her, including the use of a taser, which was ineffective. She said she was scared for her safety, adding that her family member was shot and killed by the RCMP just last December. An RCMP spokesperson added, "While we never want incidents to escalate to a point in which altercations occur, de-escalation techniques are a necessity of our job." Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
A Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling released just days before the feds announced changes to Jordan's principal raised concerns about a large number of items that were being approved as urgent requests. The CHRT said the shift in Jordan's principal led to expenses being approved for new homes, personal vehicles, and hockey equipment. Those are among the items Indigenous Services Canada recently announced would no longer qualify for Jordan's principal funding. In a January 29th ruling, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal wrote there is an immediate need for a shift in Canada's practice. The tribunal is currently looking at interim solutions to address the backlogs and other aspects of the Jordan's Principal program. The tribunal agreed with Indigenous Services Canada that the so-called back-to-basics approach implemented in early 2022 has had unintended consequences. That new approach led to a 900% increase in the number of urgent requests. The tribunal ruling says under the back-to-basics approach, the classification of urgent requests has expanded to include requests that do not align with what the tribunal originally intended. Modeling headshots, trampolines, lawnmowers, and glow sticks were just a few of the 24 examples Canada cited. The First Nations Family and Caring Society cautioned the tribunal to place little weight on these examples, given the lack of context. However, the tribunal says even with added context such as poverty, compliance with city bylaws, etc., the need for a lawnmower could never justify as an urgent need and is questionable for a deadline compliance of 48 hours under non-urgent requests. The panel does not see these types of needs as urgent requests. At an Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Special Assembly on Jordan's Principal in December, many chiefs spoke candidly about being told by the feds to spend, with some acknowledging some funds were misused.
When you are told by the people that put this program in place, go ahead and spend, and there's no way you could say no to anybody, what do? You listen to them. And that's how it became. There was people, I hate to say this, but a lot of people abused the system where our children could have used it.
The ISK Jordan's Principal operational bulletin posted this week announcing the changes says each new request will be considered on a case-by-case basis. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says there are systemic failures in Manitoba's healthcare and social services system that are having a detrimental effect on First Nations children. At a news conference this week, the Assembly was joined by councillors from the Norway House Cree Nation in northern Manitoba and members of the Albert family who attempted to receive supports for one of their loved ones. Susan Albert says her niece was sent to the Manitoba Adolescent Treatment Centre in Winnipeg for help after experiencing a psychotic episode. But Albert says her niece was never properly diagnosed and was sent home without supports after living at the MATC for 6 months.
We, the family, are seriously concerned about the systematic failures our loved one has experienced while under the care of Manitoba Adolescent Treatment Centre, also known as MATC.
Manitoba RCMP are investigating a fatal house fire in the Pneumotang First Nation, located about 240 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg. Last Friday, on February 7th at around 8:30 p.m., Gibsonville RCMP responded to a report of a house on fire in Pneumotang First Nation. The home was fully engulfed when RCMP and the local fire department arrived. 2 days later, human remains were found inside the rubble. RCMP Major Crimes has been investigating this week and says the fire is suspicious in nature. If anyone has information, you're asked to contact RCMP or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. Sex Plus Week is recognized in Canada from February 10th to the 16th, where sexual health and safe practices are brought to the public eye to combat the spread of sexually transmitted infections and unwanted pregnancies. Although Canada as a whole has seen a rise in documented STI cases, one region stands out among the rest. The Northwest Territories has been in an ongoing syphilis outbreak where rates increased by 253% between January 2019 and April 2022, making it the highest growing rate in Canada in those years. The Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority says if you have been exposed to syphilis, to visit the temporary STI clinic in Yellowknife to get tested or go to your local healthcare center. The health authority strongly advises sexually active people to use condoms, limit and know their sexual partners, and to get tested, especially after every new partner, in order to stay STI free. For more information, you can call the NTHSSA's 24/7 medical advice hotline at 811 or visit their website. Time for a quick break, and then our Truth in Politics panel will be here to discuss Indigenous Services Canada's changes to Jordan's Principle. Stick around. Welcome back. As we told you earlier, Indigenous Services Canada is making major changes to Jordan's Principle. Our Truth in Politics panel is here now to discuss. Jennifer Leywitz is CEO of Pasqua Harbor Strategies, and Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Negon, thanks as always. We're talking about Jordan's Principle again this week as there have been many developments. Jennifer, we'll start with you. Indigenous Services Canada saying this week major changes are coming to the program, saying it will no longer cover things like the purchasing of homes, elite sports events or training, international travel. Your thoughts on the changes?
I don't think the changes are a bad thing. I think some changes needed to be had, especially because we've had the the conversation around the scope of Jordan's principle maybe being too broad, but when you're not defining what is and isn't acceptable and it's not entirely clear, I can see why all of those things were pushed through. And I think it's now needed to have that conversation again about what is required and what is the purpose and intent of Jordan's principle.
Anigan, what do you make of the changes that Indigenous Services Canada is implementing?
It's really evident more of the tremendous, overwhelming, wide needs on First Nations just to provide opportunities that all children deserve who live there, that Canadian children often just accept and take for granted, that you get to be in an urban setting and you have access to all of these different things. The needs of First Nations children still, in this case, while of course I agree with Jennifer that there needs to be some kind of parameters put on the program, there isn't an endless money fountain where money can come out and be able to be provided for what is a exorbitant set of needs that is by all First Nations children, not in any way inappropriate, but certainly a large amount of them. We have to really address the issue of poverty on First Nations and the terrible living conditions that many First Nations children live upon.
Jennifer, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal released a ruling just days before these changes were made public and raised its own concerns, even at one point saying it didn't really matter what the context was, that a lawnmower shouldn't qualify as an urgent need. Are there other examples, do you think, of Jordan's principle being misused?
Yeah, I think there's, I'm not going to be naive enough to say that there wasn't misuse of it. With every program, there's going to be times where programs are going to be misused. That's just the unfortunate reality. But when you have, like Nigan had said, so many urgent needs and you're living in poverty and there's so many things happening, at the same time, it's hard to manage all of that. And I could see why so many things were pushed through. But there is that conversation between what is urgent and what is not. And when you have, let's say, a child that is stuck between healthcare jurisdiction where it's a matter of life or death, that is extremely, extremely urgent. But when you're pushing things through, like the purchase of a lawnmower, alongside applications exactly like that, and then the backlog is becoming so big, kids are going to fall through the cracks. So yes, the parameters need to be put in place, and there needs to be a measurement of what is considered urgent and what's not, so that those types of issues are just bogging down the system and kids are potentially not getting the resources that they need.
Yeah, Neon, they were saying that there was a 900% increase in urgent requests for Jordan's principle. And now, everybody's coming out with some of the concerns that the changes in the program, Saskatchewan saying that they're not going to be able to do their food and infant support program anymore because from what they've heard from Jordan's principle, are there going to be some really big issues that happen with these changes?
Oh, we're already seeing it. I was at a conference this week where not only we talked about last week the cutting of EAs, but also the situation where students won't have access to basic health supports necessary to be able to attend school. There is going to be a real impact of these changes. And it's hard, we're in a complicated situation. We have a fading federal government that certainly is going through a massive change, at least of the Liberal leadership race taking place. And then, of course, potentially we're looking at a governmental change with even a party change. So it's hard to take pot shots at this government at the moment because clearly they've also been sort of rejected by many Canadians and judged by many Canadians, according to polls. But really, the fault of this program falls at the feet of the original designers of the Jordan Principle initiative, the programs and services, by not defining early on what would be the expectation of what defines urgent care. What has happened is that over the years, people realized that you could put virtually anything, and of course, everything when it comes to children is urgent. It is about life or death situations. It is about care and showing empathy and kindness towards children in order for them to be successful. And so people eventually started to include everything under the sun that perhaps would be some less urgent than others. But the problem is when you don't define it at the very beginning, I think this falls at the feet of the federal government. And so now coming in restrictingly, and people have already depended on that funding, in many cases already spent that funding, you've created a situation which will be a dire one for many First Nations.
Nico and Jen, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks as always. We'll have much more over on the Truth and Politics podcast, where we're also going to be discussing Buffy St. Marie and the quadruple homicide on the Carry the Kettle Nation. Thanks to you both.
Yeah, me much.
Still to come tonight, a new media training course for Indigenous students in Northern Ontario, and a look at the Indigenous artists and acts up for a Juno Award. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And Marco shared a picture of his departure from Castlegar, British Columbia, on his way to eventually landing in Kalangala, Uganda for a humanitarian mission. All the best, Marco. That sounds like a long flight. Keep us posted. If you'd like to be our next photo of the day, send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at your Friday weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, -7 in Fredericton and Charlottetown. 20 below in Kuujjuaq, -23 in Inukjuak. 6 below in Montreal, snow and -14 in Val-d'Or. -8 with flurries in Sault Ste. Marie, 9 below in Ottawa. Snow and -12 in Thunder Bay, 17 below in Sioux Lookout. -23 with snow in Thompson, God's Lake, and Norway House. 18 below in Winnipeg, -22 in Dauphin. -23 in Regina and Saskatoon, 20 below in North Battleford. -26 in Uranium City, 22 below in Meadow Lake. In northern Alberta, 23 below in High Level, sunny and -27 in Fort Chipewyan. Snow and 20 below in Edmonton, -11 with snow in Lethbridge. Cloudy and 5 for Vancouver, 7 above in Victoria. -13 in Prince George, 19 below and cloudy in Fort Nelson. -27 in Old Crow, flurries, and -15 in Whitehorse. -28 in Yellowknife, 24 below in Norman Wells. -23 in Sax Harbor, 30 below in Nunavik. -28 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove, 33 below in Baker Lake. -12 in Resolute, 16 below in Igloo Lake. Going to be like 20 degrees warmer in Resolute than Winnipeg tomorrow. An Indigenous Education Institute in Northern Ontario is teaming up with a film school to offer training in film production through an Indigenous lens. The partnership is designed to equip students with not only filmmaking skills, but also a deep understanding of Indigenous storytelling. Here's Mike McDonald with more.
Manitoulin Island-based Wingush Film Institute provides hands-on media arts training. They say they're dedicated to empowering Indigenous creators through professional mentorship, immersive learning, and land-based teachings. The Institute's vice president says the time has come for Indigenous people to tell their own stories.
I think in recent years, a lot of Indigenous stories have been diluted. What with the rise of what people are calling pretendians, sort of telling that sort of washed down, watered down stories of Indigenous culture and Indigenous history. And it's important to put the tools into people who have actually have that lived experience, rather than having a romanticized idea of the experience.
Wingush is offering its short film production certificate program through a partnership with Sault Ste. Marie-based Shingwak Kinumagégamig, which currently offers courses in Anishinaabe-Moen and Anishinaabe Studies. Officials here say a film production course fits in nicely with current programming.
It's actually bridging our past and our future. Storytelling has always been a very important part of who we are as Anishinaabe people. That's how knowledge is transferred. That's how we relate to each other. It's community building. So, and now the future with media and entertainment could be a valuable storytelling piece.
As part of the course, Wingush will offer student mentorship, which they hope will drive home the importance of authentic storytelling.
I absolutely believe that minorities, we have voices that need to be heard, and I think that it's important for us to get out there and tell our stories and be as truthful and as authentic as possible. And myself not being an Indigenous but being a minority myself, I do feel like that this is a great opportunity for us to go out there.
And the course will take students through the entire process of making a film.
Screenwriting, producing, directing, production, editing, and marketing your film. So it takes you through the entire process, start to finish, of how a film gets made and how a film gets sold, which is something that's rarely ever tapped into.
The short film production certificate program is set to launch here at Shingwak Kinumagégamig in September, and registration is open now. Mike McDonald, APTN National News, Sault Ste. Marie.
Sounds like a great opportunity there. This year's batch of Juno Award nominees were announced earlier this week. The A-list includes some of Canada's most successful musicians, including a number of Indigenous artists. APTN's Veronica Blackhawk has more.
BBE, Single of the Year.
This year, several Indigenous artists are nominated for awards in the mainstream categories. The artists Alyssa P., Sebastian Gaskin, Andrew Belfour, Snotty Nose Rezkids, Kim Gucci, and Wyatt C. Lewis have all been nominated in non-Indigenous categories. Alyssa P. for Album of the Year and Adult Alternative Album of the Year on Inuktitut. Sebastian Gaskin, Recording Engineer of the Year on their single Ghost, engineered by Hilk Cortis. Andrew Belfour for Classical Album of the Year, The Large Ensemble on Ispisuin. Snotty Nose Rezkids for Rap Album of the Year and Rap Single of the Year on Red Future and BBE. Kim Gucci for Children's Album of the Year on Shunbe Natsuji, We Are Healing Through Songs. Wyatt C. Lewis for Album Artwork of the Year on Chandler. The Contemporary Indigenous Artist of the Year Award nominees are Adrian Sutherland, Sebastian Gaskin, Kaylee Cardinal, Snotty Nose Rezkids, and Tia Wood. The Traditional Indigenous Artist or Group of the Year nominees include Black Bear Singers, Brianna Lizotte, Cree Confederation, Northern Cree, and Young Spirit. While the Indigenous categories were instrumental to the awards ceremony's progress towards reconciliation, the industry agrees being Indigenous shouldn't limit an artist's inclusion in all categories. I'm Veronica Blackhawk with APTN National News.
Congrats to everyone. Great to see the nominations outside of the Indigenous categories as well. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where Fraser Needham is standing by with a look at tonight's Nation to Nation.
Coming up after the news, we talked to Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for Ontario, Abram Benedict, about what First Nations in his region think about Donald Trump's continued threats against Canada. As well, Dale Swampy of the National Coalition of Chiefs is here to talk about where First Nations fit in as Canada positions itself to trade its energy to non-U.S. markets. And finally, Howard Sapers is going to talk about his new report that finds solitary confinement in Canadian prisons is not a thing of the past. All this ahead in a few minutes on Nation to Nation.
Good stuff, Fraser. You can watch Nation to Nation right here in less than 2 minutes' time. We're all out of time for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. And Creason will be here at 1 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow for your first look at the day's news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Have a great night.